let's talk about your emergency fund. Now, I know some of you are probably going, my what? So if you don't know what emergency fund is, or if you don't have an emergency fund, the unfortunate reality is you're not alone. Actually, according to a recent survey conducted by Bankrate, 57% of Americans said that if they were encountered with a financial emergency totaling $1,000, they would be unable to meet that expense without resorting to credit cards. That is a fascinating statistic. So today we're going to talk about emergency fund, and specifically we're going to talk about your starter emergency fund. First off, let's talk about how could this happen? How could so many Americans be unprepared for a financial emergency? Think back to the early parts of your career, or maybe you're in this phase now, right? You get that first job, you get that first paycheck, and maybe you have a little extra money at the end of the month, and you're sitting there going, you know what? I know I'm supposed to save for retirement, and I know I'm supposed to pay down my debts, student loans, credit cards, etc. But I also know that I want to buy those things in my Amazon wish list. So what you see is you have these competing priorities with regard to your excess cash flow, if you have excess cash flow. So the starter emergency fund is intended to create this buffer as you're engaging with these competing financial priorities. Create this buffer that if something comes along unexpected, it won't knock you off of your plan. So what is the starter emergency fund? An oft quoted dollar amount, which again is just a rule of thumb you can take and run with and apply to your situation. But that starter emergency fund amount is often quoted at $1,000. Now, you may look at that and go, hey, that's no big deal. I can knock that out really quickly. But again, for those people just starting their journey, it helps to at least have that $1,000 mark. So if something comes up, you don't have to feel like you're working backwards and going into credit card debt. Now, to be clear, we don't stop there, right? Eventually, after addressing some of these other financial priorities, really the full emergency fund that one ought to have is often quoted as anywhere between 3 to 6 months of your monthly living expenses. You want to have that in an emergency fund. You may be thinking about that going, whoa, that would take me forever to save up for. Hence, the starter emergency fund. Okay, so here's what you do. Before you even embark on this journey, you need to know your budget. Okay, in a previous video, we covered budgeting basics, how to set up a budget, how to think about a budget. But the point is, if you don't do that step, you're not gonna know how much income you have coming in and how many expenses you have going out, and you'll never get to a starter emergency fund to begin with. So number one, you gotta have your budget. Check out that other video. Now you know how much extra you have to work with, okay? And so before diving in on all those other priorities of retirement savings and paying down debt, certainly do make your minimum debt payments. Before you do those other things, at least have $1,000 saved, okay? Where to save it? Where to save it, okay? And what a savings vehicle is an appropriate place to sock that cash, right? So the most important thing is it needs to be liquid, meaning accessible, right? And it needs to be safe, okay? So typically an FDIC insured bank account, savings account, etc., is gonna be an appropriate place for your emergency fund. Note, you don't want to take any risk with these funds. This is if something happens and you need cash right now, you need to be able to get to it. So it's not an invested fund. It needs to be accessible and safe. That's the starter emergency fund. And note, we put this point in the category of risk management. Okay, so although it is emergency savings, right? This isn't in the savings category or the retirement planning category or investing category. This is in the risk management category, okay? So you have that $1,000 now, so when the car breaks down, or if you have a medical emergency and you gotta pay out of pocket. Let's say you have a job loss. You need to cover some expenses as you bridge to your next role. Things like that, but more importantly, the things that you can't even conceive of that may happen, right? The curveballs that life may throw at you. You need a little cash to kind of bridge you until you can kind of orient and figure out what the best next step is, hence your starter emergency fund. And of course, you don't stop there. Once you have your starter emergency fund, that enables you to go on to those other financial priorities, which of course we'll cover in other videos.